started, I just want to begin the session today by acknowledging that Keelabs head office in Vancouver is on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and give thanks for their generosity and hospitality on these lands and waters. So thank you again for taking the time to be here. We also have Kim, our partnerships coordinator, helping us out today. You might see her in the chat box or answering some of your questions, so feel free to say hello to Kim. If you're new to Keela, welcome. Keela is a complete nonprofit management software that helps you manage your donors, market your nonprofit, and most importantly, raise more money for your cause. Just before I hand it over to our friends from Imagine Canada, I just have a couple housekeeping items to go over. So today's session is 60 minutes in length, and it is in an Ask Me Anything format. So Bridget and Laura are here to answer your questions. We received a ton of amazing questions through the registration, so thank you to everyone that submitted their questions that way. And throughout the presentation, please feel free to write any additional questions you have in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we will get through as many as we can. And speaking of the chat box, please remember to just select everyone when you type so that all of our guests today can read your comments and questions. And finally, our webinar today is being recorded. You will receive the recording within the next couple of days in a follow-up email. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen from Imagine Canada to introduce Grant Connect and our session today.
Thanks so much, Meredith, and thanks everyone for being here. Before I introduce myself, just wanted to start with the land acknowledgement as well. Imagine Canada staff depend on traditional Indigenous territories to provide us physical space, sustenance, safety, and community to work, live, and play. Our physical head office is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Chippewa, and the Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge that these lands are still home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and that our ability to live and work on these lands today is a direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since then. We aim to, as an organization, we aim to listen, learn, establish meaningful connections with our Indigenous nonprofit sector colleagues and take actions every day that advance reconciliation in the sector. And I'd appreciate others sharing their land acknowledgement as well in the chat if you're comfortable doing so while I introduce myself. So I've been looking forward to this event, and I'm grateful to have such a big turnout. I'm Stephen Baldwin. I'm the Senior Manager of Enterprise and Product at Imagine Canada, and we're an organization that works every day to support the charitable and nonprofit sector. I work specifically on Grant Connect, and I know many of you are familiar with Grant Connect. For those who aren't, Grant Connect is a fundraising research platform that gives charities and nonprofits in-depth data on thousands of funding opportunities from foundations, corporations, and government. These are sourced and updated daily by our data team. At a higher level, our goal is to unlock more funding for charities and nonprofits like yours, and that's what kind of motivates us every day. You can go to imaginecanada.ca/grantconnect to learn more about us. You can sign up for a webinar or a trial. We also have a limited community edition that's available to use for free in many libraries, schools, and resource centers across Canada. So I encourage you to check that out. If you haven't used Grant Connect in a while, we underwent a major redevelopment this year and also recently acquired a platform called Fund Tracker through a partnership with Aja. So it's an interesting time, both for us and for our subscribers, but also just a really interesting time to be working in grants and philanthropy. And I know, and we experience this as a charity ourselves, that there's a lot of uncertainty, but there's also a lot of cause for optimism. I think our team recently wrote an article informed by Imagine Canada's research and advocacy work on shifts in the grants landscape. So these included an increase to disbursement quota, a loosening of restrictions that will unlock a ton of funding for grassroots organizations and other non-qualified donees. I hate using that term, but basically organizations without charitable status. Also the continued rise of donor advised funds and this major shift towards trust-based philanthropy. And I'm pretty sure a lot of these topics will be touched on today by our very experienced panelists, Laura Manning of the Lilas Hallman Foundation and Bridget Estrella of the MLSE Foundation and MLSE Social Impact. Organizations like these two are literally foundational in our sector. They've given tens of millions of dollars and had a tremendous impact on their communities through building these collaborative, long-term, trust-based relationships. Since I've joined Imagine, I've been kind of obsessed with finding ways to connect foundations with charities and nonprofits in forums like this, because I know these relationships at their best, they're just so much more than transactions. You know, when a nonprofit or charity partners with a funder who shares its mission, its values, its vision, they can transform their communities, but they can also transform each other. And I've seen that happen in practice, and it's pretty incredible. If you have ideas about the role Imagine Canada and GrantConnect can play in supporting these relationships, please reach out to me. Always happy to talk about these things and learn kind of what we can do better. I'm also happy to answer anything GrantConnect related today that comes up in the chat, or again, you can reach out to me offline. I can drop my email in the chat. So thanks everyone for your attention, and yeah, I'll be quiet now and pass it over to Bridget and Laura to introduce themselves and their organizations. We can dive into this AMA.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I am so honored to be here and spending some time with y'all. It's unfortunate I can't see you, and then you can see me, so I don't know. This is quite awkward, but I'll manage through. I just want to start off by saying that for myself and the organization that I work with, that reconciliation is a verb for us. It is something we practice every single day. On my personal journey, I'm committed to listening and learning and honoring the privilege of which our First Peoples and Indigenous communities have given me to be able to live, grow, work, and play on these lands. On a professional capacity, we are committed to disrupting traditional philanthropy through trust-based philanthropy, and that supporting the transition of capital to support organizations. After saying that, I'm Bridget. I've been with MLSE Foundation and MLSE as the corporate entity I'm on my 13th season. So because we work in sports, we talk in seasons. So 13, lucky number 13 for me. MLSE Foundation believes that sport can be used as a tool to amplify life skills. We're really focused on the term sport for development. So amplifying education, employment, mental health, and obviously physical activity as the core root of the work that we're doing. Thank you so much. I'll throw to Laura.
Thanks, Bridget, and hi, everybody. Really interested to dive into your questions today and try to give you as much help as we possibly can. I'm calling in today from Kitchener, Ontario, which is on the Haldimand Tract, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinootan people. And I am representing the Lilas Hallman Foundation. We're a regional place-based grant maker. We focus exclusively in the region of Waterloo. Our 3 municipalities and 4 townships, so we get a little blend of everything. And the majority of our grant making work is done around children and families, and that is interpreted in various ways, but we also do a little bit of work in healthcare and in post-secondary education. And I am the executive director here. I have been in this role for just over 11 years. And prior to that, I was on the other side of the table as a major gift fundraiser. So I'm a recovering fundraiser. This side of the table is better, but it's more work, even though nobody believes that.
I believe it. I'm also a former fundraiser, so yeah, I know that life as well. So I think, let's get into it. We got so many great questions, tons of things for, that our audience wants to hear from you both. So let's start with maybe some questions in terms of the grants application process and determining fit. So our first question for you, and maybe we'll start with Bridget, what makes a strong case for support? What are you looking for in an application? Maybe what are the most important things?
I think, like, if I pull this back, I know I can speak to on behalf of our foundation and kind of the work that we do, and we look specifically in the grant application. If I can pull this back to give more of an overarching view on how people can apply for grants. And so, one, do you fit with the granting criteria? Is the granting criteria listed somewhere? Can you read it? Can you review it? How well do you fit with the granting criteria? Is there an opportunity? So do they have a, maybe a workshop or something you can go in prior to submitting your grant application to ensure where you can ask questions or see determined fit and availability? And then, interestingly enough, we were submitting our own application for funding, and they made a really good statement. They said to us, read some of this person's tweets. You'll see their language and how they like to form things. And I thought, that's genius. So I would say anyone who's applying for our stuff, what are we talking about? Where are we talking about it? What does our Instagram look like? What does our website look like? What are some of the key words that keep coming up in our messaging? And do you see the organization as a fit? And maybe Laura might have a different viewpoint, but don't typically see, because we funded X organization, that we might fund your organization, because granting priorities change year over year. And typically we like to see a good breadth of what we're supporting organizationally. So just because we've funded something of the like previously doesn't mean that you might necessarily get the grant. Yeah, so that's what I would say there.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, looking at their social media is such a great tip. I don't think a lot of people would think to start there when putting together an application. Laura, did you have anything to add to that question?
Well, I guess just a couple of things on Bridget's point of sort of zooming out. There's also, I find when I've done other sessions like this, there's often a real desire for like a single plug and play answer. And the short answer is there isn't one. So every funder is different. Every foundation is different. They all have their own criteria, their own processes. Bridget and I can speak to what we do in our own roles, and for sure there's some common tips, but always just keep in mind that everything has to be tailored specifically to the parameters that you're looking at, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things that I see in terms of, how do you make that case for support stand out is the degree to which an organization has really thought through not just the case for support, but their theory of change. So here is what the thing that we are trying to accomplish. Here's what will be different if we accomplish this thing. And here's how it fits with the things that you say you care about. And one of the places where I see organizations fall short fairly routinely is that they are so passionate about their own work. They take it as a given that what they're doing is good. But when you're sitting in our chair, everything that comes in is good and worthwhile. And we still have to understand enough about the nuances of it to figure out how to prioritize things, where our dollars can be put to the best and highest use for community. And so you really need to be able to describe that theory of change in order to strengthen your positioning within that pool of applicants.
Amazing. Yeah, you both kind of touched on some things to do, and Laura, you touched on maybe a couple things to avoid. So we got a question in about, what strategies have worked well for applications or projects that you've seen that were successful after initially being rejected? What changes could somebody make maybe that would change the outcome?
Well, I can jump on that to start with. And again, everybody's practice is different. In ours, if we decline an application, we will offer the opportunity for folks to have a conversation about why. So tip number one is, if you're offered that opportunity, take it. But if something then comes back in another round, I'm looking to see if they listened to what we said. And so it can really be as granular as providing a budget that has some rationale attached to it, and isn't just like a grocery list of 5 items and 5 totals, and I need to know a little bit more about what's behind that. Is that 3 full-time positions or 6 half-time ones, and how does that fit in with your plan? But often it is more about that kind of philosophy and impact that folks are trying to move towards, and being able to really articulate that in a concise and clear way.
Yeah, I can build off of that. We do the same thing. We offer feedback post submission. So yes, the same answer. I encourage you to take that. One of the things, grant writing is a skill, y'all. Like it is a refined skill. Some of you that are joining us today might be in a volunteer capacity. Some might be board members with limited time. We understand that, and we try to put in the correct criteria to mitigate against that. But I would go back to like schooling days. Like, are you having someone else read your essay? Are you having someone else who doesn't know your organization, who's not intimately involved in your work, to be able to be like, yes, this makes sense for me? Can you have a colleague in another industry review it, or potentially in another not-for-profit, give it a quick read, like maybe it's a grant reading circle, something like that, so that they can understand, because we're just picking it up for the first time. So taking that zoomed out view, someone who doesn't know your organization, doesn't know anything about you, am I able to pick up your grant and understand within the 20-30 minutes it might take me to review it, ultimately what your ultimate impact is? And that would be something I would add to that. There was one more thing, but I've lost it now.
No, that's great. I think the majority of the questions that we got a lot of questions about standing out in the application process, and how do you differentiate yourself and move to the front of the line. So I think those pointers are all super helpful.
I will say that to build on Laura's point of like, did you take the feedback that we gave you? And I'm sure Laura will attest to this. I cannot tell you what I had for dinner on Wednesday of last week, but I can remember an organization and what grant they submitted last season. So I won't remember your birthday, but grant application highly likely.
Good to know. Good to know.
And on that topic though of how do you stand out, and Bridget was mentioning a few things that you want to not do. Jargon. Please don't use jargon. Don't use acronyms, at least not without explaining them. We have, in our case, community volunteers and youth volunteers who read all of our applications. They need to be able to understand what you're talking about. We always suggest to folks, like, if your 10-year-old niece could not read this and understand it, then you haven't simplified and clarified enough.
Yeah, such good tips. I think we all, and this happens in any industry, we all get so close to the work that we're doing that when we write something, it makes perfect sense to us. So it's always good to kind of take that step back and make sure that it would maybe make sense to somebody who doesn't know who we are or what we do. I'm gonna switch gears just a tiny bit. We got a question in that's a little bit more specific. So it says, our organization is a social enterprise serving Black women at all stages of business ownership. We also have a strong focus on mental health and wellness, coupled with the issues around anti-Black racism. When we apply for funding, there are so many areas that could benefit from funding. How do we narrow down our ask and focus? Laura,
do you want me to start, Bridget?
Yeah, let's go first.
And those are hard. And completely understand that for so many organizations, the work doesn't conform to specific age groups or specific geographies or any of the other things that funders typically use to narrow the pool. I think one of the best things to start with is in which of those areas do you feel you can make the best case? And where can you take the work that you're doing and best align with what a funder is looking for? So it's not necessarily about choosing, we're going to, bear down on this part or this part, but what are you preferencing? What are you putting out front that's going to be your hook? And then describing how those other aspects feed into that primary aspect that you've put forward, if that even is a complete sentence.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Go ahead, Bridget.
I was just going to say, I want to do a reframe. I love that. And while it may seem like a challenge, my brain automatically went, wow, that's amazing for you. Look how many different opportunities you have for funding of all these different initiatives. And just to build off of what Laura said is like, what is the, saying that what's your best case for support? So look at that across all of your impact areas. So knowing I'm going to apply and then look at the grants that are available and then strategically prioritize, okay, for this grant, I'm really going to focus on just this area. For this grant, I think we can apply it here. And for this grant, I can apply it here. And then the one thing that I would ask you not to do is please don't include the laundry list of other things, hoping that we might fund it anyways. It's not a thing. It just actually ends up taking away from how impactful the one thing that you're applying for is.
Yeah, so focus is better than broad asks. Okay, great. We're going to move into, we also got a lot of questions about reporting and budget. So I'm going to kind of shift gears to that a little bit, but can you give a few tips on budgets to go with grant applications? What are common pitfalls and what are some best practices? Laura, you're already off mute, so I'm gonna throw it to you first.
I didn't go back on.
She's gonna mute herself every time now.
So a couple of things. As I referenced earlier, there's sort of this sweet spot of enough detail but not too much. We're certainly not looking for every single minute piece of, how many pencils are in the box that you're using, because we're not the government. But at the same time, there needs to be enough detail for us to be able to look at something and understand, does that number make sense? If this is the piece of funding that you're looking for, and this is what it's lining up against, is that reasonable? And that's not only in terms of, do I feel like you're padding the numbers or something? It can also be the other way. We have looked at applications and gone, they're not including enough money for personnel. They're going to need more hours than that. Let's have that conversation. The other thing that I would say is we always ask applicants to include real costs. So don't nickel and dime it down because you think it's going to make a better application or a more likely to be viable application. Tell us what it actually costs to do the thing that you want to do. And in our case, we say, then please trust that if we're interested in it and we can't fund the full amount that you've asked for, we'll come back and talk to you about that. It will not automatically, sort of toss you out of contention. Because I think there's a real bad culture within the nonprofit sector of undervaluing people, time, resources, and we need to be able to deliver services or whatever programming it is that you're involved in a way that creates not only a good environment for clients, but a good environment for staff and personnel as well. Bridget, have you got some other ideas?
Yeah, I would, going back to the tip I kind of mentioned earlier and that Laura and I have kind of talked about. So not to toot our own horns, but like not every funder is going to be like our organizations where we look at a budget and say, hey, is this reasonable? Have they asked for enough? Are they maybe off in some areas? And that's what we're looking at the budget for. Some some funders out there are really looking for a line by line budget. And in their reporting criteria, they might say, if you move your up or down 10%, you have to allow our organization to know. There are still some organizations out there. So when you are researching the grants, take a look at what the budget requirements are. If there is an opportunity to join a webinar, a training session, watch a funded like a recording on how to apply, please do that. Please reach out about the budgets and know specifically. One, you know, you just want to be able to put it in the best way possible that they're asking for. And two, when that budget is that resource intensive, just knowing the capacity of your staff and your organization to deliver on those funders' expectations.
Yeah, for sure. So we got some questions in about metrics, and I imagine, you know, this could look different from application to application, but if you were to both maybe choose the two most important metrics that every funder would want to see in a report, what would those be for you? Maybe Bridget, we'll start with you this time because I've been picking on Laura a little bit.
So again, this is the one time that comes to me.
Yeah.
I tend to shy away from output metrics. Organizationally, I think that we have such an amazing sector, and some of the projects that are happening and some of the things that are being developed, and these collective impact models and collaboration and sharing resources actually makes grant applications and projects a little bit more heavy from a financial standpoint, as they should be, because as Laura said, we're recognizing real costs here, and that's going to take a bit of time. So I started in the industry when we were doing like people used to do the math and say, well, like at this 20,000 divided by, they said they would have 20 young people and it's going to cost us this much. We tend to shy away from that. I think outcome metrics, and how are they aligning? So for me, it's like, how does that work with my theory of change? And it wouldn't be anything different than that. So if I'm focused on resiliency, life skills, mental health, what one metric are you going to give me post your program that I would put on my Instagram, that I would share with my donors, that would go in my yearly case for support? I would look at something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly in our case, when it comes to specific metrics, we're looking at what makes sense in terms of the grant that we're looking at, and we fund in so many different kinds of ways and different kinds of areas that there isn't a magic bullet as far as that goes. I will say the one thing we look at in every application is, what are you hoping to learn from undertaking this work, and what can we learn from partnering with you? And the one way in which we organizationally define a failed grant is if we don't learn anything. So I think it's important to remember that those are metrics too. Beyond the cost per participant, here's the percentage grade average that we're going to bump these students by providing homework support, or whatever the more operational kinds of metrics are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, just gonna say, Laura, I just wrote that down. Anyone who's going to apply to the foundation grants in a couple of months, that's our new question. Thank you so much, Laura.
We're all learning from each other today too. Okay, I have one more question, just in the reporting and budgets kind of topic here. So we had somebody say, we typically don't have the capacity to craft lengthy reports for each project or funder, so we sometimes avoid applying to specific grants altogether. How do you suggest we speak to funders such as yourselves about other methods of reporting that work better for our organization, things like video or phone calls? Maybe Bridget, I'll throw this one over to you again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to see that a lot of organizations are transitioning their reporting requirements, or even their application requirements to a two-step process. So doing an expression of interest first, so you're not doing a lengthy grant application for something that's not going to align. And then the same thing, if there is an opportunity, I would ask beforehand, is there any ability for us to report in this way, which is more aligned with the work that we're doing? Will you accept a different style of reporting? I wouldn't say so much with, I would say, like, I would question organizations and funders on how much they're actually reading their grant reports, on like who's paying attention to them, what kind of feedback are they giving the organization. If you are asking for a report, like, are you touching base with them to like, tell me more about this? So maybe if the reporting is a little bit lengthy, but they're sticking to the like, no, we need a paper trail. Maybe it's something their board requires, a mandate within their organization, then ask if you could kind of do the two-step process and build on what Laura says. Like, what am I going to learn from you? What are you going to learn from me? And how can we make this more of a reciprocal relationship versus transactional?
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, if you are in a situation where you have the opportunity to have a conversation with a program officer, with an executive director or whomever, is to start from a place of how you think you can meet what they need in a different way, as opposed to presenting it as, this is easier for us. It probably is, but if you've been able to tease out from the stuff that they're asking for, here's the kinds of things they're very concerned about, and then say, could we look at presenting you this kind of information in a different format, and here's what we would do to make sure that you're still getting these key pieces that you need. I would also say that if it's simply the degree of detail that they're looking for, that you don't believe that they actually need, or that it's going to create another half-time job for you to collect, is at that initial meeting to ask very straightforward and innocent questions like, can you help me understand how you're going to use this information so that I'm sure I'm capturing it correctly? And that leads into a conversation of, is anybody actually going to look at this, and are they actually going to care? And that might create some space for you to then have a more intentional conversation about how it could potentially be done differently. I would not always assume that, if there is a fairly high burden of reporting, that's been thoroughly thought out and discussed recently. It is in some cases just an artifact of, this is the way we've always done it, so we're always going to keep doing it this way, and that's not a big part of what we're thinking about. So there may be some wiggle room there, and there certainly are more conversations within philanthropy than there were 5-6 years ago about what's being asked for, what the burden is that's being placed on organizations, and how that can be handled differently. So there may be more room for flexibility than there used to be.
Great. I mean, that's good to know that there is sort of becoming a place for kind of different ways of doing things. That's exciting. The next question that we had, it's more on the stewardship relationship building topic, and it's very broad, so I'm going to let you two kind of interpret it in the way that you want. But what makes for a successful relationship with a grantee? What would you want to see throughout kind of a relationship building process with them? Bridget, did you want to go first?
Sure. I think I'll just build on the transactional element. And I think from a funding perspective too, I think a lot of and I will say, like, a reciprocal, less transactional relationship. How are we having conversations? How are you keeping us in mind? Not for the like, come out and see our program, but more so like, invite us into your program. Let us understand the nuts and bolts of how you work, shadow you for a morning or an afternoon, depending on what the initiative is. We like that sort of stuff, less surprise and delight, and more so just time together, understanding each other's work. And I will couple that with saying that I'm not sure about Laura, but like with our organization, many people might see, oh, they're, you know, a funding organization. They're probably extremely well resourced and have all of the time and can do all of the things. And just coupling with that, we're not. So we are also challenged by resources. We are so challenged by time. We want to make the most amount of time. Obviously, connecting with our community organizations is the first of our priorities always. So just the longer runway we can give to that, you know, just not last minute requests to join you and to have conversations and that sort of thing, but being meaningful and respectful of each other's time goes a long way.
Absolutely. I mean, and we're in the same situation. We're a team of 4 people, and we're probably granting somewhere around $15 million this year. So, you know, we get stretched too. Warning is good. In terms of building a relationship, I would say honesty and authenticity are really important to us. And not that anybody has earned it right off the bat, but we really want to know what's not working as well as what is working. Not so that you can be judged as an organization, not so that we can, you know, take funding away. We've never done that. But again, so we can learn from your experience and maybe have some additional ideas of how to help you overcome that hurdle. But also, we're also working with 30, 40 other organizations, some of whom may be dealing with the same thing. And maybe we can save them some time and heartache by saying, you know, we've heard about this thing happening. Have you considered that as well? And I think the recognition, you know, you talked about stewardship. One of the things that is an ongoing irritation is folks, and it's usually larger organizations that have a full development shop. I'm sorry, former colleagues, but it's true. Who want to treat a foundation like ours like an individual major donor. And so they want to pat you on the head a lot and tell you how fabulous you are, and frankly, blow a lot of smoke. This is my job. This is what I am paid to do every day. I am not interested in being told how wonderful I am. It's not my money. It's the community's money. I'm just helping it get to the places that it needs to go. I want to know about the work. I want to know about what you're doing. I want to talk to the folks that are on the front lines of what you're doing, who can help me better understand that space and improve my ability to direct resources appropriately. And I think making that distinction is really important, because there are some foundations that are largely a tax vehicle for individuals, and they're the ones making all the decisions. And you need to be able to make the distinction between those two things. A little bit of time and effort to understand that in the background, I think, can go a long way too.
Amazing. Okay, we have a couple more questions that were pre-submitted, and then we're going to get to all of the great questions that are coming in through the chat box and through the Q&A. But this one is kind of around core funding and core operating costs. So how do you suggest organizations talk to their funders about the importance of funding core operating costs? I'll see who unmutes themselves first.
I'm gonna go, Laura. No, I was gonna unmute to tell Laura to go first.
So we do a lot of core operating funding, and especially we were starting down that road previously, and especially during the pandemic, we've gone much more deeply into that. So that was more a matter of us identifying that that was a more impactful way of funding than anybody coming and asking us about it. But again, I think, and you have to know your funder and who you're talking to. But you know, one of the things in fundraising that tends to come up is folks, you know, that will say, well, we can't use the glossy paper in the report, or we can't, deliver the program in this way because the donors won't like it. It's too expensive. And I think we don't give donors enough credit, and I will say that about foundations too. I think folks have gotten in the habit of using overhead as a metric because nobody's given them anything better. and a little bit of education and a little bit of time spent in an honest conversation, in many cases can go a long way. So if you are in a situation where you're seeking funding and you have great alignment, but it won't pay for the people or the rent or the paper or the whatever it is that you need, if there's an opportunity to have that conversation and say, we really feel like this is a good fit, here's the ways that we're helping to achieve the things that you're looking for, but we're not able to do everything that we would want to do with the kinds of parameters that you have put in place, and here's why. It may simply be a lack of understanding. There are a surprising number of people sitting on boards of grant making organizations right this moment who do not understand what core government funding does and doesn't cover, who just don't have a grasp on what the realities are within the sector. And they may just need some help to understand that, and also recognize that it takes time to make that shift. And so not expecting that you can have one conversation and have them change their whole orientation. But I think coming from that place of here's what we're trying to do and here's what's getting in the way is probably the best place to start. Bridget?
Thank you. That's a great answer. I would say, like, even from a short-term perspective of one of the things that just consider, and I hate saying, I feel like, as you said, overhead costs is such a, like, it's a negative term. Any sort of program support is program support. People, building, permits, it is all program support. The program wouldn't be able to function without those wraparound services. So let's start calling them wraparound services, because everybody loves the, that term. And I think that's kind of one way to kind of break it apart in your grants, particularly, and if further conversations need to happen, I would definitely echo the way Laura phrased that. And then just know that from a funding standpoint, it is a very old narrative. It is a tough narrative, for organizations, and I wouldn't say for Laura's, but maybe more mainstream corporate foundations, that sort of things. There are people that are sitting and staff and people that are committed to moving philanthropy forward, to advocating for core operating support and capacity building for organizations. A few years ago, there was a lot of buzz around sustainability. Well, we don't want to give them too much because then their program's not sustainable. But if we're not supporting capacity building for organizations, you're not going to be sustainable anyways. So know that we are having those conversations in the boardrooms as much as we possibly can.
Amazing. And then we got a lot of questions around trust-based philanthropy. So can you speak to what trust-based philanthropy is and how your organizations are adopting this type of practice, if you are, in your funding endeavors? Maybe Laura, we'll start with you for this one.
See, I was going to say go to Bridget for this one. So trust-based philanthropy is one of those phrases that's getting tossed around a lot right now. And that's partly due to some work that's been happening in the States with a group called the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, which is actually just in the process of winding down now. But they did a lot of work over the last few years around creating a set of principles for funders that would allow them to engage in philanthropy in more of a partnership and less transactional way. We use that language to some degree. We don't formally subscribe to that particular set of principles. I think one of the benefits of being a place-based grant maker is that we tend to be very relational in the way that we work anyway, because we do get to know organizations over a longer period of time. And our sort of standing joke, at least before the pandemic, was, we know if programs are happening because we live here. We see what's happening. We meet these people in the grocery store. And so, you know, there's a number of different layers and ways that you can address things, like due diligence when you're in the same locale. But I think the core of it is recognizing that it is a relationship, and that creates certain obligations on both sides. A lot of it has to do with being honest and upfront. And, you know, as Bridget was saying previously, you know, bringing forward a problem before it's a major problem so that we can work through it together on either side, recognizing the value that both parties bring to the table, being respectful of the time and energy and expertise on both sides of the table. And stepping back, I think for funders, it means stepping away from that very typical traditional sort of accountant oriented oversight role of, you know, we need to make sure that you little nonprofits are doing what you're supposed to do. And knowing that the organizations that are out there doing the work are the experts in it. And so what can we do to enable that to happen better, more efficiently, more effectively, more impactfully? And what about the way that we are doing things gets in the way of that? Bridget, I don't know how it's interpreted in your world.
I will give an example. So we are a sports-based charitable organization. We do predominantly focus on sport. We use sport as a tool, as I kind of mentioned earlier. But we are modeled traditionally after the other NBA, NHL teams, and, you know, engaging communities and young people in sport. We like to think of ourselves as like a little bit more innovative, you know, pushing the limits a little bit. And I have a great team. I have a really amazing team that I am inspired by every single day for their passion and commitment to this work. And we started to talk about trust-based philanthropy. And being a traditional, more of a traditional foundation for many years, it was a newer concept, and that's okay, because not everyone's going to start on the same journey. You know, they're not going to be at the same line as you, and you want to bring people along. But multiple rounds of conversations, both internally and with our boards and that sort of thing, to kind of, you know, even to start to unpack trust-based philanthropy. So we had already started working with an organization that we were going to start this process with. And that organization actually came to my board meeting and spoke about trust-based philanthropy, spoke about our partnerships, spoke about, you know, the work that we're starting to do together. And that is my favorite viewpoint of trust-based philanthropy, is that reciprocal partnership. So, you know, moving from like tipping the scales on the balance of power, moving from a traditional funder to fundee relationship, and me being able to call my partner organization and say, I am really struggling here. And like, I got you. So that is what we look at from our perspective. We really see it as multi-year funding, unrestricted funding, which we traditionally haven't done. It's reciprocal. The partnership is reciprocal in nature. We've talked about, you know, what, you know, my favorite thing, if we were going to wave a magic wand, what would success look like at the end of this for both of us, and being open and honest about on what that is, and then creating this amazing pathway on how we get there together. And then obviously the transfer of capital, and understanding that, as Laura said, this is the work that you do. You are the experts in this field. You know, so I'm going to transfer this capital to you, and inherently trust that you know the best and are the best to be able to make change.
Amazing, yeah.
Sorry, can I just add one more thing to that, which is that, because Bridget just made me think of it, but, you know, one of the conversations that happened with our board early on in this was a really frank discussion about, you know, if we feel the need to have that very elevated level of oversight, and to you know, really focus in on every little detail of the way that something is done, and we're going to tell you what the need is, we're going to tell you how you should address it, that very traditional thing. If we don't trust an organization enough to step back and say, you're the experts, you go do the thing that needs doing, why are we funding them in the first place? Like, if you have to build in that layer of accountability, there's something else wrong. And I don't think you should be giving them any charitable money if that's what's required in order for everybody to feel good about where it's going and how it's being used. And that was certainly something that was a change in perspective for some of our board members that was really important in terms of getting us down that road.
Amazing. Okay, we have just about 10 minutes left, and we want to get to some of the questions in the chat. So we've had one come in that says, we are a charity providing writing and public speaking workshops for immigrant and refugee women. What are your suggestions for seeking funding to run recurring programs? It looks like foundations prefer new ideas and new projects. Bridget, did you want to grab that one first? No?
I literally just got off of the call on the same conversation with our team. We were talking about risk mitigation in an economic downturn, and how we are going to, as an organization that funds organizations, but also does our own programmatic things. And one of them is the constant need from our own funders to what is new and what is next. Yeah, it's a thing. I think, you know, there's definitely ways to, I would say, I don't want to say that you're like pulling the wool over anybody's eyes, but, you know, how is your program changing year over year? I would ask you that, because I'm sure it is. The landscape changes every single year, your demographic changes, the community might change. So what are the new things that you're implementing year over year? What are you growing and building on year over year? So, you know, what outcomes did you have last year that you've put into your new programmatic frameworks to have those changes? So it doesn't have to be a complete overhaul, but how are you showcasing to grant applications that you are going to grow, learn, and change, and you're adapting to the changing demographics within your community? But I will throw to Laura, who might have more insightful things to say.
Well, I mean, commiseration in part. Yeah, that's a crappy part of the existing historical culture. That it's new and different that's prioritized, and yet at the same time you will hear folks say, well, there's too many charities and they're duplicating each other. And well, why do you think that is when you look at the way that we've structured funding for the sector? But I would just build on what Bridget was saying, in that if it is a recurring, ongoing program that is achieving what you set out to achieve and you just need to keep it going, are there ways in which you can structure that to still continue doing those things, but with a slightly different intentionality? Like, is there something else you would like to figure out that this program is a way? So is it, yes, we need to keep doing this, and we would like to reach, figure out if there's a way to reach a different population, or disaggregate some of the data within the program to really understand whether certain groups are receiving more benefit than others from the way that it's currently structured. Like, are there ways that you can examine your own work that you're already doing in a different way that might better position you for funding that is typically geared to a brand new program, and might improve your chances somewhat?
Great. We got a question in from maybe a younger charity or a newer charity. So what is your best advice for a new charity that does not have the 1 to 2 years of audited financial statements that so many funders are requesting? Laura, did you want to take this one first?
Well, we don't.
Okay.
The financial documentation that you have to provide is relative to the size and history of the organization. So part of it might be looking for the funders that don't do that, the ones that are interested in more sort of venture philanthropy, startup kinds of things. But I mean, the other thing that I would say is, you know, if you feel you have a great alignment and that's your one barrier, and if you have the time and capacity to do it, is to still apply and just explain why that is. You know, we're just getting going. Here's some other things that we can show you to show how our finances are working and the kinds of due diligence that we're putting in place, but we can't do this specific thing that you're asking for, and be very upfront about it, like right off the bat.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead, Bridget.
I was just going to say the same thing. Is just like you're a smaller organization. My question would be like, do you even meet the threshold to have audited financials? Like, I think it's like you have to over $100,000. Can you show where you've waived in your board meeting minutes that you are under the threshold and can waive having audited financials? Some organizations still might require them. I know for ours, we are funded through 50/50. If you've ever been to a Leafs Raptors TIFI or the Argos game, that's the predominant our funding comes in, which means it comes in from the Alcohol and Gaming Commission. So some of the ways that we grant are restricted through certain things that we need to receive. So it's not for lack of want. Some organizations, just as I said, the policies and mandates there. But echoing that there's some amazing social enterprises that are coming up. And then how can you partner with an organization to kind of vet yours? So we do grant agreements and that sort of thing. Maybe there's an opportunity there that you're maybe not even using your own charitable number until you get up to the capacity where you need that.
Great. Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so I think we have time for one more before we close it out. But how can you collaborate with grant givers if they have already picked out the particular organizations that they want to give their grants to? So I guess where are the opportunities to maybe get in front of grant givers when they've maybe already allocated all of their funding? I'm thinking this is a stewardship kind of, how do we get in there early kind of question.
It's funny. I wonder if this is like a dead money conversation. I don't know, Laura, if you use that. It's the idea that sometimes when these bigger funding announcements have made, these organizations have been picked along in the future, which is a more challenging question. If it is just like getting to know an organization, I hope it's not that. I hope it is the thing of like how to, you know, connect with more grant makers. And then it would just say like, things like this, be it virtual or in-person events as a way to connect with us. I will say though, as much as like we do remember, we read your grants, we have a completely separate selection circle. It is a process of community members that review and rank our grants. It is not even done by our board, although some of them do participate. So connections will never, our connection, at least I'm sure the same for your organization, Laura, is they will never sway like who is getting the funding, because it is a completely separate process.
And I mean, I would just add, without knowing the specifics of the situation, not all money is good money. And if you have to put that much time and energy in trying to overcome a boundary or a screen that a funder has put in front of you, maybe don't try for that one. You know, look for the funders that have open calls for application and anybody can put something in, because you've only got so much time and capacity. And even if it seems like, wow, that would really be a great fit, it may be more of a cost just in terms of hours and energy than it's worth for what might come out of it in the end, unless you've got a lot of internal capacity to pursue things.
Okay, I hate to bring this to a close because I feel like we got so many great questions. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for the next 3 hours, but sure, everybody has to go back to their day. So that does conclude the session for today. thank you so much again, Laura and Bridget, for bringing such incredible insights. I mean, I think I can speak for all of us, and based on all the amazing questions that we've received, this was really inspiring. There's so much valuable information here, and you both brought such a great energy to everybody's Thursday. So thank you for that. Before we go, I just want to let everyone know that there will be a very short survey that will pop up right after the session. Should only take you about 20 seconds, and we would love to kind of hear your feedback on the session. And this is the last Keelabs webinar of 2022. It's crazy, but we are here. This is the final one. We do have one planned for January 24th, and we will be joined by Michelle O'Keery to look at 2023 fundraising trends to help you prepare for the year ahead. And I believe Kim has just left a link to register for that in the chat. So we hope that you can join us. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Bridget and Stephen. And we will see everybody in January.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks, all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.